Right now, a geopolitical earthquake is shaking North America to its core. An ultimatum has been delivered, a historic alliance is fracturing, and a brand new, aggressive doctrine is literally redrawing the map of the Western Hemisphere. Now, this isn't some distant conflict happening halfway around the world. No, this is happening right on America's doorstep. It's a crisis between two of the most integrated nations on Earth, and believe me, the aftershocks are just getting started.
This right here, this was the threat that brought a G7 economy to a dead stop. Just a single tweet, a direct message from President Trump to America's biggest trading partner. Look, 100% tariff, that's not a negotiation tactic. That is a declaration of total economic war. It means that for every single dollar of Canadian goods that crosses the border, another dollar gets paid in tax. It would instantly vaporize any profit, shuttering factories, collapsing supply chains, and it threatened to throw the entire country into a deep recession, like overnight. It was a loaded gun pointed squarely at the head of America's closest ally.
The very foundation of the U.S.-Canada relationship, which you could argue is the most stable and peaceful in the world, is cracking under the strain. I mean, for decades, this whole partnership was built on an open border, shared values, and, deep economic ties. So how on earth did we get here? How did one potential trade deal with China threaten to blow up a century of friendship? Okay, let's break it down.
To really get this, we have to rewind just a little bit to a high-stakes diplomatic mission. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, was in Beijing, and get this, he was the first Canadian leader to visit since 2017. He was not there for a photo op. Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, was elected on a promise of, being the steady hand on the economy, and he was in China to solve a fundamental problem that basically held his country's entire future in the balance.
Now, what's so fascinating about this slide is the story it tells of just extreme dependency. A staggering 2/3 of everything Canada sells to the world goes to one customer, the United States. For a long time, that was a source of incredible wealth. But it's also become a massive strategic vulnerability, really an economic chokehold. Prime Minister Carney knew that in this new era of American protectionism, that dependency wasn't a strength anymore. It was a critical flaw. So he was in China looking for a way out, trying to build other bridges before the one he was standing on started to crumble. And he was close. He was right on the verge of a preliminary deal. And it was a classic, pretty modest trade-off. China would slash its ridiculous 85% tariff on Canadian canola oil, a huge deal for Canadian farmers. In return, Canada would open its market to a limited number of Chinese-made electric vehicles. For Canada, it was just a small step towards some economic independence. But back in Washington, this wasn't seen as diversification. No, it was seen as defiance. It looked like an ally was breaking ranks, giving a strategic rival an economic foothold in North America. And then, the hammer fell.
The choice was pretty simple. Face economic annihilation or surrender. Carney folded instantly. His office put out this terse statement, just abandoning the China deal. And the statement specifically mentioned Canada's obligations under the USMCA, that's the trade deal that replaced NAFTA. And here's the kicker, that entire agreement is up for a mandatory review in 2026. So with the threat of these insane tariffs already out there, Carney knew he couldn't risk having the whole framework for North American trade just torn to shreds. The message from Washington was sent, and yeah, it was received loud and clear.
But make no mistake about it, this whole confrontation was never really about canola oil or electric cars. This was the first major public test of a radical new vision for American foreign policy. It's all based on this fundamental belief that to compete with China on the world stage, the U.S. has to first establish absolute, unquestioned dominance in its own hemisphere. It has a name, and it's a name we all need to understand. President Trump himself calls it the Donroe Doctrine. It's a very deliberate, almost boastful mashup of his name with the historic Monroe Doctrine from way back in 1823. And in his own words, it trumps the original by a lot. So this isn't just, slapping a new label on an old policy. This is a complete reimagining of America's role in its own backyard, shifting from being a distant protector to being an absolute hands-on authority. And the difference is just stark. The original Monroe Doctrine was, at its heart, defensive. It was basically a line in the sand drawn in the 19th century, telling the colonial powers of Europe, hey, stay out of the newly independent nations over here. The Donroe Doctrine, though, it's offensive. It's an assertion of dominance aimed not just at powers outside the hemisphere, but at the nations inside it. It basically says the U.S. has the right to intervene unilaterally for any reason, economic, political, military, and it doesn't matter what international law or national sovereignty has to say about it. And listen, this isn't just some theory being debated in a think tank. We've already seen it happen in real time. In January, U.S. Special Forces raided and captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The justification? The Donroe Doctrine, removing a hostile foreign influence. In February, the U.S. Navy just started sinking suspected narco submarines in international waters, completely bypassing normal legal channels. And right now, diplomatic pressure is cranking up on Canada over its sovereign claims to Arctic territory. This doctrine has teeth, and it bites.
This quote from the veteran Canadian diplomat Bob Rae just perfectly captures the new reality that's dawning in Ottawa. The idea that the United States could pose a direct threat to Canadian sovereignty? That was unthinkable. Now, it's being whispered in the halls of Parliament. You know, that old joke about Canada becoming the 51st state suddenly doesn't sound so funny anymore. The psychological bedrock of the entire relationship, trust, has been shattered.
So, backed into a corner, Prime Minister Carney gave in on the China deal. But that was followed by a stunning declaration of his own. He said the era of an ever closer economic relationship with the United States, which has been the cornerstone of Canadian foreign policy for over 50 years, is officially over. And that wasn't just talk. It was a signal of a massive pivot, a desperate search for a future that doesn't run solely through Washington, D.C.
I mean, think about it. If Canada can't rely on its neighbor, it has to find new friends, and fast. Carney's government is scrambling. Free trade talks with India, which were frozen after a diplomatic fight, have been urgently restarted. Ottawa has announced it wants to join the Safe Defense Fund, which is a European project to build up the continent's military industry. And a new defense pact is in the works with South Korea. It is a full-on race against time to build new partnerships and escape the immense gravitational pull of the American economy.
The shockwaves from this new doctrine are not just contained to North America, not by a long shot. The decision to prioritize absolute control of the Western Hemisphere is forcing a strategic realignment all across the globe. From Mexico City to Brussels, leaders are trying to figure out what to do with an America that is turning inward, focusing on its own neighborhood with an intensity we have not seen in generations. And it's America's oldest allies who are feeling the most anxious.
And this shift is now official. It's written down in U.S. strategy. The latest national security strategy document explicitly elevates control of the Americas above other global commitments. The logic is actually pretty clear. In a world of renewed great power competition, the thinking is that the U.S. has to secure its home base first, turn the Western Hemisphere into an economic and strategic fortress free from rivals like China before it projects power anywhere else.
And that pivot has sent a tidal wave of panic across Europe, as the U.S. talks about getting out of endless wars to focus on its own hemisphere. It's demanding its NATO allies spend an unprecedented 5% of their GDP on defense. This is way more than just a budget dispute. It is a moment of truth for the entire transatlantic alliance. For 80 years, European security has been guaranteed by the United States. Now, Europe is basically being told, you're on your own, and you better figure it out fast.
So where does this leave America's northern neighbor? For Canada, the risks that geopolitical analysts are pointing to are, well, they're existential. That upcoming USMCA renegotiation is seen as a loaded gun, a moment where the U.S. could demand huge concessions. The ability to have its own China policy? That's effectively gone, a major loss of sovereignty. Clashes over the resource-rich Arctic, which used to be an academic topic, are now a real possibility. And there's a genuine fear that the U.S. could start exploiting Canada's internal political divides to get what it wants.
So what happens now? A new order is being forged in North America, whether by choice or by force. The old rules are gone, and everything is up in the air. As this all unfolds, three potential, very different futures are starting to emerge for Canada and its relationship with the United States.
First, does Canada just accept its fate as a tethered ally? That would mean renewing the trade deal on America's terms and basically giving up a huge amount of autonomy in foreign policy in exchange for keeping the economy stable. Second, is a successful pivot even possible? That's the path Carney is trying to walk, where Canada slowly builds new alliances, but that would strain the historic relationship with the U.S. to its absolute breaking point. Or third, and this is the most dangerous one, escalation. Does a dispute over, say, Arctic shipping lanes boil over into a full-blown crisis with consequences that are just unthinkable?
So for anyone watching this in the United States, the real question is, why does any of this matter to you? Well, for supporters of the Donroe Doctrine, the answer is simple. It means a secure northern border, it pushes back against Chinese influence right here in our hemisphere, and it guarantees that critical Canadian resources like oil and lumber keep flowing. It's the ultimate expression of an America First foreign policy. But it also comes with real costs, alienating a key ally, creating instability on the border, and potentially higher prices for everyone if those deeply integrated supply chains get messed up.
Ultimately, this crisis forces a question that echoes across the hemisphere and really around the world. For America's closest friends and neighbors, is this the new reality? In this new American order, must a nation like Canada really be forced to choose between its sovereignty, its basic right to chart its own course, and its security, which has been tied to the United States for so long? That question is not a hypothetical anymore. The answer is being decided right now, with consequences that are going to define this continent for decades to come.